Hello, everybody, and welcome to Chapter Select, a seasonal podcast where we bounce back and forth between a series, exploring its evolution, design, and legacy. For this season, we are covering the Pokemon franchise. My name is Max Roberts, and I am joined, as always, by Logan Moore. Hi, Logan.
Don't get better than this, Max. At least that's what Pokemon fans would have you believe. This is the peak right here. This is top-tier Pokemon.
It's all downhill from here, is what you're saying.
Sort of. You still haven't experienced the trumpets of Gen 3 of Ruby and Sapphire. That is maybe the peak. The trumpets.
Does it go? Is that how it goes?
Yeah, it sounds like the trumpet that plays in the Heat Miser. It's before the Heat Miser enters the room in the Cold Miser or whatever his name is from the Christmas thing.
Do you smell the ham? Is the ham?
I can smell the ham. We'll have to clip this whole part out because people will be like, "What are they talking about? Smell the ham." It is almost ham season.
It is almost the ham time.
We're 2 weeks from ham time, baby.
Just as a reminder for you listeners, we now have a Chapter Select membership. You can find out more at chapterselect.com/join. We've got bonus content going all the way back to season 3, but for season 6 here with Pokemon, we've got battles between Logan and myself, building teams, and all sorts of stuff. So if you would like to see Logan and I fight each other, you can check that out by going to chapterselect.com/join.
Yeah, please come join. We've got a ton of great bonus content that we've been stashing away for months and months and months upon end. It would be great if you guys come check that all out. If not, I hope you enjoy the core episode. And today's episode, again, is about HeartGold and SoulSilver. We've got a guest on the show that we're going to bring in here in a moment to talk about everything related to the game. But before we do, Max, let's run everything down about this game or / games, because we are going to talk about the originals a little bit here as well. Pokemon Gold and Silver, HeartGold and SoulSilver as well. They were developed by Game Freak. They originally released on the Game Boy Color and the Nintendo DS. The Game Boy versions launched on October 15th, 2000. And HeartGold and SoulSilver came to Nintendo DS on March 14th, 2010. The game director of the original was Satoshi Tajiri. HeartGold and SoulSilver's remake, the HeartGold and SoulSilver remake was done by Shigeki Morimoto. The producers on the game were Takehiro Izushi, Takahashi Kawaguchi, and Sunikazu Ishihara. For the remake, the producers were Junichi Masuda. I screwed up the guy's name, who's the one you're supposed to know. Junichi Masuda, Shusaku Egami, Hitoshi Yamagami, and Hiroaki Suru. We're almost done with the Japanese names. I'm saying this for myself. I always feel so bad with this because I feel like I'm butchering these people's names. The music was done in the original by Junichi Masuda, Go Ichinose, and Morikazu Aoki. In the remake, it was once again done by Go Ichinose, Shota Kageyami, Hitomi Sato, Junichi Masuda, and Takudo Kitsuda.
I say you did a great job.
Metacritic average for HeartGold and SoulSilver sat at an 87 out of 100. Max, you also added a note here that IGN gave the original games a 10 out of 10. So these are two of the higher ranked Pokemon games ever, I believe, which kind of is in line with what I said before about these being top tier. This is maybe the peak of Pokemon, in my opinion, and we've been telling you that for quite a long time. And let's see if our guest Peter Spezia happens to agree with that. Peter, we have not podcasted in a long time. It's good to talk to you again.
It's about time. Logan, Max, thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming, Peter.
Of course, we did. When Max and I first started putting this Pokemon season together, I think you were definitely near the top of our list of people who were like, oh, well, we got to get Peter on an episode. He's Mr. Pokemon. I feel like we've talked about Pokemon with you on podcasts of some sort in the past.
When it's been, 15 years of podcasts and things, and then at one point I did a weird YouTube show about the Pokemon anime, so Pokemon's always been a thing at some point, so yeah.
You've totally just unlocked memories. It was called, wasn't it called WTF Pokemon or something? What was it called?
Sure was, yes.
Oh my gosh, my mind has totally been taken back to the Show Me Your News days when you were doing that show. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so Pokemon's been a long history, and I appreciate the consideration and giving me the pick. One of my favorite games of all time is Pokemon HeartGold SoulSilver, so I feel like that was the one I wanted to pick, and I appreciate that it was available.
For sure. Well, I mean, that's a good jumping on point to our discussion here. I guess just what was your history with... I mean, the game we specifically have played here is obviously HeartGold and SoulSilver, but talk to us about your history with the original games as well, and then these remakes, and it's obviously one of your favorite games ever, like you just said. So I don't know, where were you at when these games first came out?
When these games first came out, I think it's important to step back a little bit. With the original Red and Blue, that was 1998 in North America, and the story I always tell. So apologies if anyone's ever heard it before. But I mean, the whole thing is Ash Ketchum is 10 years old. And young Peter in 1998 was 10 years old. So, I mean, right on the money, like hit me right there. And so going forward, Gold and Silver was an anticipated launch. As much as it can be, right? I feel like a video game launch in 2000 is very, very different than what we're used to with social media and just a constant bombardment of pre-launch hype. It's very, very different. But I remember anticipating that at launch and getting that. I played Silver, played the heck out of that for sure. Even Crystal after that. And to even just be like, oh yeah, you have the option to play as a girl. They have the animated sprites. That was a big deal, right, for Crystal. And for it to be Game Boy Color specific for that one also. The little bump, the convex on the Game Boy Color cartridges as opposed to the concave for Game Boy. So, dating myself plenty, I'm sure, but definitely, really appreciated those games. I feel like, throughout the years since then, had a couple weird times where it's like, okay, maybe I play Ruby and Sapphire several months after that. But getting to HeartGold and SoulSilver, it was the end of my undergraduate time at the University of Michigan. And I remember like a ROM went online of the Japanese version because, of course, that was a time where, that version of the game came out before it got all translated by a difference of like 6 months, I think. It was significant. So I remember playing a fan translated, patched, cracked, what have you, ROM of HeartGold, when that came out, enjoyed that. And then just, once SoulSilver came out, that was my, personal game of choice that I wanted to go with. And that's my favorite in the Pokemon series. Played them all, enjoyed them all to some extent, but I feel like there's something special to Gold and Silver with how they expand that world and the brilliance of Satoru Iwata to help with that original game, right? The programming wizardry there. To only expand on that with Generation 4 is, I think, a great generation. Huge improvements with the physical and special attacks and make that more realistic and how they calculate the math there. So a lot of great improvements. Still a slow generation, just a slow speed of those health bars going down. But overall, that's why it's my favorite. Like, it brings me back to, my youth. There's something to Fire Red Leaf Green, which is a great remix for sure. But HeartGold SoulSilver is where it's at, and that's where it's very fondly remembered for me.
Max, we'll come to you. So we'll come to you last because I know you have no real history with this game, so we can use it to jump on and talk about the game itself here. I did want to say, so you were a little older than me when this game came out in 2000, Peter, but I still remember the lead up to Gold and Silver because Red and Blue kind of came out of nowhere, and I was also a Pokemaniac in, I want to say like 1999 probably. I think I got into it around when Yellow came out.
Dude, I think all you got to say is Peekaboo.
Yes.
Like, no one who is like listening in Gen Z today is going to know what that is, but that was everything back then.
Yeah, I got into it, I think 99 would have been when I got into Pokemon, and I had started consuming the show and the games, but I think Gold and Silver is one of the first instances in which I ever remember a game coming out and like, I need to get this the first day it has released. And I was I was getting my mom to call stores. Hi, when is this game out? I remember seeing the commercials. I actually looked up the commercials for the old Gold and Silver before we did this. And I don't know if you remember like the animated Pokemon walking through like realistic environments and stuff like that. I remember seeing those commercials like a good like 6 weeks before the game came out. And I was like losing my mind, like, oh my gosh, it's almost a year. Oh, the new Pokemon.
In a pre-social media era, like I don't even think Pokemon fever has ever been matched by anything else since. Like it was a phenomenon in the truest sense of the word. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I don't ever remember another Pokemon launch like that either, because I didn't have a GBA when Ruby and Sapphire came out, so like I needed to, I was a poor kid, so I couldn't go get the new hardware, but I did have the Game Boy Color, so I was ready to go with Gold and Silver. And I distinctly remember that game launch, and my parents picked me up after, I want to say like they picked me up after school one day, and my dad told me to reach into the backside of the seat in front of me because there's a little holder in there, and I reached in and pulled out Silver. I was like, oh my gosh, like they got it before they came to pick me up for school, and I was like freaking out. I think I showed my teacher because I was right there in the pickup line. I was like, look what I got, oh look. So like I remember everything around that. Speaking of Heart Gold and Soul Silver though, I don't, there's nothing I really remember with that other than just like, oh, this is a remake of the games I like a lot, and I got it. And it's still clearly very good. Probably one of my favorite entries in the series. I will say though, this playthrough has changed some of my thoughts on it in a lot of ways, and it has not aged all that gracefully. There are some very big quality of life improvements that have come about with Pokemon over the past decade, which I don't think I appreciated as much until we played this game. And I think moving forward, so we've played Fire Red and Leaf Green already, Max. This will be the oldest game in the series that we'll have played the rest of the year, because I think everything moving forward is 3DS and up. So this is the only actual DS game, or I guess Black and White, but those are newer compared to this as well.
Yes.
So they have done some very good mechanical tweaks and upgrades, and even beyond that, there's like a lot of little niggles that I have with this game that we can maybe touch on as we go on throughout this episode. I'm curious how Max thinks about this though, because he has never played this game before, and this has always been heralded as the best one, and I still would say this is perhaps the best one, like even with my complaints.
Yeah, because with a lot of the newer improvements, the newer ones also have big detractions. But
yes.
I agree with you in that we'll get to talking about how like, this was eye-opening in quite a few ways. But as a whole, I don't think you can go wrong like recommending this one to someone as like, hey, maybe have this be one of your first Pokemon. Yeah. Maybe Fire Red, Leaf Green, probably a better one for even like, new to JRPGs, right? But this is a really good, I think, entry point.
I've always heard of this as the best Pokemon game ever, bar none. I knew about the whole Kanto add-on at the end, so it was like this revelation that you could go to the first game all over again, get those 8 gym badges, and then fight Red or yourself, who you were, fight them at the mountaintop. Like I always heard of that, but never experienced it until now. And so there was a lot of expectation coming into this game. But I do have some history with this game, apparently. Having Peter on the show, doing all this stuff, I decided to do a little bit of research into some old stuff that I used to do. And the first time Peter and I ever spoke was actually back in 2009, in May of 2009, which would have been right before the Japanese release in September of that year. And then March 2010 is when it came out here in the States. And wouldn't you know it, if not on the podcast, but Our Princess is in Another Castle, we talked about this. And I pulled up a couple of clips to my own embarrassment here.
You're going to make us listen to 13-year-old Max?
Hi, everyone. Future Max here. I know you were expecting to hear prepubescent Max's voice talking about Pokemon HeartGold and SoulSilver. Just want to issue a slight correction. The first clip you're going to hear is actually from the second episode of my first podcast ever, which was recorded in, it looks like June of 2008. We wouldn't have Peter on the show until 2009, so a year later. So me talking about the myth or the rumor of HeartGold and SoulSilver is from 2008. Peter wasn't on this particular episode, so here's the clip.
Really?
Seriously.
Pokemon Gold, Silver, DS. This myth has been floating around for ages, and I just stumbled across it. Few images of cover artwork. I've actually compared them with my diamond artwork. They're very realistic. Very good job if this is all fake.
I don't know. These were, I guess, Cerebi. I was big, so I had just come back into Pokemon with Diamond and Pearl. I'd just been brought back into the fold, and I guess I was chewing everything up. I had Platinum, and they were probably rumors beforehand. Oh, undoubtedly. An obvious next step would have been to remake Gold and Silver, but I had apparently recently had found out about this in 2009. I actually never ended up getting the game. I actually didn't buy another Pokemon game until Pokemon X. So I don't know what happened, like what deterred me from playing.
Money, probably.
Maybe, but I mean, I was still able to get other, like I remember getting Phantom Hourglass, which I think was a little bit before that. It may have been after. I think before though, because I was in St. John when that came out. I don't know. I don't know why I didn't get it. I didn't get Black. I didn't get Black 2 or White 2, any of those. I didn't come back until X. I do remember my friends having HeartGold and SoulSilver and having like the Pokewalkers on their hips, taking them to school, walking around, that element to the game. But for some reason, I never grabbed it. I will say, I don't know how the two of you played it this time around. Coming into this season, when I didn't own any of these DS games, I was a bit nervous that I wouldn't be able to afford it, and so I looked into emulation and stuff. I did get all of the games physically, but I started on my 3DS and then just found my 3DS XL was a bit big, even though I downscaled it to the 1-to-1 pixel size. I actually ended up digging up my wife's Pokemon DS Lite, which is in immaculate condition. It's this pink chrome kind of DS, and that brings me to another clip that Peter has haunted me for years. It's one quote I've always remembered from the episode.
It's one of those things I may have almost just, spoken out by default.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Here's this one.
I really don't think it'd be smart to walk in there with a DS to play a Pokemon game with college.
Oh, come on. I have a pink DS, and I'd totally do that.
Okay, well, yeah,
Chicken.
That's my
There's
friend
no
Robert.
shame in a pink DS. There's no shame
There's
in a
no
pink DS.
shame.
And honestly, look at that is the rose gold one, right? The one that one looks so nice. I
beautiful.
had it wasn't any metallic hue or anything like that. It was pink as pink can be.
I remember that one,
you just got to own it.
I owned it now because I took this thing everywhere and played it, and people were like, what is that? Some kids who are younger than me in high school, they're like, is that a DS? Oh my gosh, how old? I'm like, oh no. And then I crumble into dust.
A week ago, I had to travel, and I brought my DS with me on the plane, and I of course had to unload everything when I was going through TSA, and I unloaded my Switch, and I unloaded my DS, and the TSA person knew what the Switch was, and they said, what is this? And I said, oh, it's a DS. And they're like, what? They were very confused why I had a DS and a Switch both on me, and I put them both in the bin. So I got some looks for that one as well, Max.
Max, I think you're also lucky that rose gold's in these days. So
It definitely is in these days for sure. But I remember you always saying you had a pink DS, and
yes,
listening to that episode was actually really rough. I'm amazed that you and I stayed friends after that. I was very, very full of it. I was very cocky and mean. I was a terrible kid, but I always remembered that. So I thought it was fun to be able to pull that clip back up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. Yeah.
But that's kind of it for me and Gold and Silver and my history with it.
So what's your thoughts on it? I got to hear this then. So you've heard it's the best one. Me and Peter still think it's great. I'm going to assume
you had all this setup.
I did. It's a good game, but it's a hard game to play as an adult in 2022. And I think that's my biggest is my time in life where I am. I'm I'm a 28-year-old adult man with a job, and the grind in this game is so time consuming, and I just don't have endless time to just pour into learning the world and the schedules and talking about it with a bunch of people. And I imagine this as a schoolyard game was incredible. It's like, if you go here at this time, this gym trainer's in the Cerulean department store and you can get their phone number and this is how you battle them, and just learning and doing and reading online. But as an adult, it's like, I don't have time for this. I need to level up. It's very difficult in that way. But the payoffs in this game, the milestones, the Elite Four twice, I want to say origami. It's not origami. They have kimonos.
Kimonos.
The kimono girls, that battle, getting Ho-Oh in my case instead of Lugia, and then your rival throughout the whole journey, Team Rocket. All these have great payoffs that lead into the ultimate hype payoff of fighting Red at the top of Mount Silver. And it's awesome. So it's this game that I'm pushing and pulling with. It's like, get out of the way, game. Let me just play you. But also, wow, does it feel good to overcome the challenges of this game? And so it's interesting. It's definitely a piece in time, and definitely a game for, I think, a better game for people who have more time. So I would love a remake on the TV.
Of a remake.
I would something that I could play on the TV at least.
Yeah.
Something a bit more sit down and get into the zone. I feel like today, with phones and everything being portable now, instead of just a dedicated handheld, I found myself way more distracted playing a game on the DS. I'd have my iPad over here with like strategy for whatever I was doing or where I needed to go, but then things are going on around me, and I just don't have, I don't have the same attention span of a 10-year-old to just sink right into this. So it's a good game, but it's a hard game.
I think this game's best quality, and I imagine this is something all of us will agree with, is that it is the one game in the Pokemon series, other than, I guess, Black and White 2, which is a sequel more than it is a totally independent Pokemon game. Like, every Pokemon game from this point forward is just an independent game of its own, new region, new story, new characters. This has those elements, but it's very much a sequel. Like, you talk about all the payoffs, Max, but I think the payoffs are even greater because we've already played Fire Red and Leaf Green this year. So we've got that whole game, which builds into this one greatly, which makes those moments of fighting Red on top of Mount Silver, or even the story of Team Rocket continuing onward. Like, those moments are so great because they are building off of what has come before. And Pokemon has never done that since in any capacity that I can think of other than Black and White 2. And it really makes it that much more special. I don't know if people would appreciate them as much if they haven't played Fire Red or Leaf Green or Red and Blue or Yellow or whatever, which I feel like everybody kind of has at this point. But that's what really makes this game so much more special, is that because this is the first generational jump, they hadn't really known what that was going to look like yet, I think. And so they just naturally thought, oh, it's a sequel, so of course we have to tie it in with what the last game was. And eventually they dropped that because they just realized it was probably unsustainable. Like, we can't put Kanto and Johto and Hoenn in a single game. So they just... But with this one, they totally did try to make it a sequel because that's just the logical thing to do. And I think that's why people like this game so much. And that's and that's the single thing I can point to, which I think is so great about this game, is that it is a follow-up. And I love that.
And you kind of continue that with also the idea of the jerk rival, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is the last time that, like, your rival is just mean. He's a criminal that steals a Pokemon from Professor Elm's lab. There's a break-in. But then, you tie that to the fact that, and I'm trying to remember what the event was. I don't think we played it, naturally, because I think it was tied to a special event. It might have been GS Ball, Celebi, some sort of event or whatever. But when you learn that Silver, your rival is Giovanni's son?
Yeah.
What?
Canon, Max, canon. Your rival is Giovanni's son.
I read that Giovanni like hides in the cave that connects Johto and Kanto. I was actually kind of hoping that he was going to be in charge of a gym or something, and that you would like, fight him again. But I didn't see him.
So there is an event, and it's lost on me, like where you do get to encounter Giovanni, I believe, at some point through a special event or whatever, and then there might even be like maybe.
Isn't he in that cave?
I'm getting old.
Is he in that cave?
He's in a cave. I don't know if it's necessarily the Tojo Falls cave, but some cave. There may have even been like a little bit of a confrontation, or maybe he's just like, I have a boy your age or something like that. It's things like that. And then also the lines that talk about how like, I remember battling this boy a few years ago, and like it's all the gym leaders like kind of reminiscing on Red, and it's like, you kind of remind me of him. To then lead up to that moment. Like it is super cool for sure.
Apparently Giovanni does show up during the Celebi event, according to GameFAQs discussion board from 12 years ago. So
my dumb knowledge is not lost on me. Fantastic.
Let's before we get more into the mechanical side of this game, which I think there is a little bit more to talk about. Let's touch on the story, because I feel like we're naturally sort of doing that anyway. How did you guys feel about many of the broad beats in this story? Because I feel like they're kind of, it's not very cohesive. And this is how I felt with Fire Red and Leaf Green. Like there are things that are happening and things you come across that you have to do, but none of it really flows together. And I don't feel like they really started doing that until Ruby and Sapphire, when it's like Team Aqua and Team Magma, and they're tied to the legendaries of the region, and they're trying to get the legendaries. Like there's just Team Rocket's kind of off in a corner trying to revive itself. You're trying to become the champion. You've got this rival that you're butting heads with. There's just things that are happening as you kind of roam around the region. And then you've got the side story with the legendary, and it's tied to these kimono girls. And it's just, there's just a lot of stuff happening that doesn't really feel interconnected in ways that make a whole lot of sense. And I think that's fine for what it is, but they definitely do a better job in the future with the storytelling, especially with like the professor stuff too. Like Elm's just kind of like, hey, here's an egg, and like everything is just kind of thrown at the wall and thrown at you as the player, and you don't really know how to. I mean, you know how to respond to it, I guess, but it's just all very disconnected.
I think it goes back to the programming, back from the original Gold and Silver, where it's honestly a miracle that that game happened for the limited, data that they had to move around. And you hear about, glitches on those old Game Boy games. Like, how does that work? I guess like the moon ball is completely ineffectual because it's supposed to work best on, Pokemon that evolved from a moonstone, but then they like identify the Pokemon wrong, so like the moon ball just doesn't work, and that's Kurt and the apricorns and all of that. I've never thought of that before, but I think that's really interesting of how Ruby and Sapphire does it correctly with specific beats with the antagonist team of well, they got to get the sphere, and then this happens, then we meet them on the Mount Chimney or whatever, and then it's the big confrontation. But I think when you have to like try to stay on script based on a very old game that is, limited technology and all that, I've always thought that the whiplash between Team Rocket is in the hideout in Mahogany Town and they're pretty weak and underleveled. This is, of course, following Red Gyarados and everything. And then you take on Price in Mahogany Town, and then suddenly they've taken over the Rocket Tower, so we're whiplashing over to Goldenrod, and then they're significantly better. I think it's trying to recreate a time when the programming and the beat for beat hadn't been all developed, but they're trying to recreate the feel. And so I've always thought like that was so weird with Team Rocket that suddenly we're in a hideout, but then wahaha, Giovanni, listen to us now. Here's our master concoction, and then that's it. Like, that's all for Team Rocket.
I do love Rocket's motivation in this game, though, which is that they got their butts kicked. Giovanni left, but there's still this radical cult of people that he grouped up over the years that they're like, no, we won't let this mission die. We have to keep this going. We've got this mission from Giovanni, and we will continue this legacy, and they're trying to keep it going. Like that's a great arc for Team Rocket specifically, which I really dig over the course of this game.
I think it's better than like, Team Flare and X and Y.
Yes.
You'll get there, but it's like, oh, I want to end the world. Cool. Great.
I just wish, it feels like Rocket just vanishes. Like you kick their butts at the radio tower and then they're just gone.
Hey, they steal some
not
parts.
Much leadership.
They steal. There's a foreign guy in Kanto who steals
that's true.
steals a part to a generator for some reason and then hides it in Misty's gym
to train. Yeah.
Also a little weird to kind of look back on it. It's like, you want to consider like Pokemon racial humor? Like it was a thing back then and they kind of continued it, but yeah. Why does he have an accent? Like
he's from a different country, whatever that means. He's like, yes. Oh, I'll go back to my homeland now. It's like, okay, goodbye.
It's just so. It was interesting because I like at the start of the game. I liked the little stories in each town you kind of went to. Like the Slowpokes had their tails chopped off, which was just very cruel, and then they eat them. It's like, what is going on here?
But then they're sold later.
Exactly. And then I wrote it down. Where was it? Oh, the far-fetched were lost in the woods. Like you'd get to little towns, or the one Pokemon was sick in the lighthouse. But
Amphi.
I wrote this as like, keeps it engaging. I like these. And then a few bullets later in my notes, now those little stories are slowing up progression. They feel like one more step. Like now they're getting in the way of each other. And I feel like there's just I enjoyed those stories, but it felt like there were some pacing issues at times. And especially for Logan and myself coming off of Sword, which is just go to the gym. Here's the gym. and
here's cutscenes and like, more modern storytelling. And it's like, we're trying to retell it how we did in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And 10 years later. I wish Kanto had a bit more story to it. It feels aimless in a way. And I know that's not technically true. They plop you right in the middle of it and have you they guide you in a circle around to get all the badges, but there's no, I guess your only motivation is you want more badges, so you just go get them. But there's no threat looming per se, no motivation besides the gym stuff. So that I wish there was a bit more there.
And then they make you do similar things again, like, hey, Snorlaxes are in the highway again. Got to clear them again, but there's no flutes this time. You got to get a radio flute. They kind of, the things that they do introduce in that sort of side story way is done again.
Yeah.
I think it would have been nice for Game Freak to look at and see like, okay, how can we flesh this out and make it better? Because it is very much the same way of how Kanto was pushed into Gold and Silver. And again, we'll stress, it was miraculous that happened. Like it should not have been done, but Satoru Iwata, by the skin of his teeth, made it work. But in 2009, 2010, finishing up development, wouldn't it have been nice to think of like, how do we flesh this out more instead of you're right, relatively bare bones for the novelty of it all. And it's hard to say. Yeah.
Especially because like Fire Red and Leaf Green added like whole new story segments with like the Sevi Islands and stuff like that.
I noticed that they weren't in this game. The Seafoam Islands aren't here, which I thought was interesting considering they had put them in Fire Red and Leaf Green, which came out before HeartGold and SoulSilver. Yeah. So I thought they would have wanted to keep that kind of world continuity there. I liked how, is it Cinnabar is the island in the bottom corner? Like how Cinnabar is gone. And Blaine is like in a gym in a volcano. Like that's pretty cool. Like there's some legacy world stuff there. If you've played Red, Blue, Fire, Red, Leaf, Green, those games, those characters are around still. I like that, but that's lost if you haven't played those games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very much just kind of doing a tour around Kanto and seeing what all the other gym leaders have been up to and how they've changed and what their Pokemon teams are now. And that's kind of about it. And there are some other things that have changed, like obviously Giovanni's not the gym leader anymore, so they slot Blue or Gary, whatever you want to call him, in there. And then you've got Koga's no longer around as well.
Because he's in the Elite Four.
He's in the Elite Four, which is a cool thing that I always thought was very novel when I was a kid. Let's talk. I have a lot of things to say gameplay wise and mechanically, and I want. Let's start off this way. I have always told Max that my least favorite gen my least favorite games were Diamond and Pearl OG. There was a lot of problems I had with them, but I always would then conversely say Gold and Silver, HeartGold and SoulSilver were some of my favorites. And so going back to this, I started to wonder why HeartGold and SoulSilver are my favorites, because they're mechanically the same as Diamond and Pearl. And I don't know what this really just smacked me in the face this time. Like, wait a minute, how stupid was I to say that this is my favorite and this is my least favorite? I think part of that's just because of other elements associated with Diamond and Pearl. But anyway, yeah, there's a lot of weird, small issues I have. And I don't want to list all of them because then it just gets mundane. For the most part, again, this is a Pokemon game. I don't know how much we want to say about the core combat and stuff. It's all still Pokemon, and it's still early Pokemon. And I do like how simplified the combat is compared to how it gets in later games. Like, I don't love all the like X and Y onward with the form changes and stuff like that. I've not been the hugest fan of, or Dynamaxing, or these things are fine.
The gimmick, yeah.
Yeah, it just feels like a gimmick. Even with Scarlet and Violet, now we've got the
terrestrialize.
Yes. Yeah, we're getting very strange. It feels like we're running out of ideas. So I do love how basic the combat is in that sense. And I guess we can just start there. I don't know, because there's other things I want to bring up that aren't necessarily related to combat. I mean, how did you guys feel like these games still play nowadays, just as turn-based kids level JRPGs, I guess?
Yeah, I agree that it's nice to not have the gimmick in a sense. And again, when we're talking about this episode representing the Gen 2 game with Gold and Silver, but also the HeartGold SoulSilver, I mean, we keep bringing back, like, it's because of how it was, but it's pretty inextricable there. I think the big gimmick here with this one in Gen 2 was the addition of 2 new types. You kind of had to counter Psychics, which were too overpowered in the first game. And so you add the Dark type. Okay. I don't know what was the necessity to have the Steel type, but it's worked out to be fine. Especially a weird counter to fairies. Go figure how that works. Like, Steel attacks are super effective against fairies.
It took a long time for Steel to really feel like it was relevant within Pokemon.
Exactly.
It was just kind of shoved aside for so long.
And okay, a Steel ball slams into a rock and it explodes the rock. I get that too. But it was interesting to have then, you had the Steel gym, you had the Dark Elite Four trainer, and that makes sense. I feel like that was the big thing in Gold and Silver, more types. And then we wouldn't see that again, I believe, until Fairy, if I'm not mistaken, which would be X and Y Gen 6. So, I mean, that took a little bit. As far as HeartGold and SoulSilver being off of Gen 4 with Diamond and Pearl, I mentioned it earlier, but the change of just saying that, well, it's this type of attack, therefore it plays into your special, or it plays into your attack. The way that worked in the older games, where it's like, well, water is always special and normal is always physical. And for Gen 4 to introduce the idea, well, no, it depends on the kind of attack. If it's a punch, no matter what type it is, it's going to be a physical. If it's a beam, no matter what kind of type it is, it's going to be a special. And for that to, you have your special attack and your special defense. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think Gen 2 still had only the special type. It wasn't broken out into special attack and defense. I think that was Gen 3 that change was made.
I think you're right, but also you would be in a better position to know than me, because I played those games when I was just dumb kid, and I'm like, oh, use the move. Like, I had not gotten into the under the hood stats recognition of how Pokemon operated at that point in time.
Gotcha. Yeah, the first 2 gens, there was just a special stat, and it just kind of encompassed all of that. But then Gen 3 was where it changed up, and you really get the nitty gritty of the EVs and the IVs for all the big Pokemon nerds out there. They know the natures and all that. But Gen 4 was big, I think, in kind of recognizing, okay, what's this attack actually doing? Where do we attribute that to its attack, to its special attack? And I think that was huge. for Platinum to have come out and I think refined Gen 4 a little bit more, and then HeartGold, SoulSilver, I think that improves when you talk about the difference between that and Diamond and Pearl. The speed is, for as slow as you look back on HeartGold, SoulSilver and think that it is, Diamond and Pearl was slower still. And that's because of the improvement they made with Platinum. So, I mean, it's things like that it is interesting to think about. Okay, well, yeah, it's been a while since this HeartGold, SoulSilver game has come out, and how has Pokemon changed since then? But you think back to the original Gen 2, and it's been further changed still.
I'm getting the hang of remembering the type stuff better, Logan.
I told you this game would do it for you, because Max still doesn't have the whole grid memorized in his head, and Sword and Shield was kind of helping him a little bit more with that.
Yeah. It helps when the UI, says it's super effective. Remember, you tried this before. Yeah.
More of that, please. Scarlet and Violet, please. I'm getting better at it. I have to say, as someone who really, before this season, the last Pokemon game I definitely played front to back was Platinum and Diamond and Pearl. Being back on the DS felt I was immediately at home. My thumb was flying around the touchscreen UI. I think it's still the best. I'm sure some rose-tinted glasses here, a little nostalgia. I think it's the best UI just because of the immediacy of touch. And sure, you could do that, I believe, on the Switch. If you play in portable mode, I believe tapping the screen would interact with the UI. I wouldn't see why not. Perhaps not. But I enjoyed that tremendously, being back in the 4 quadrants and being able to move and have things be a little snappier. Having the Poke Gear was the
Yeah.
That was cumbersome. It felt like too many clicks or taps to get where you wanted. It's like you open it, go to the map, go to the thing, now you can zoom in or go around. But that's fine. There's a lot of reliance on the phone, which I'm sure we'll talk about in this game. At some point, the phone is definitely huge. But in the realm of battling and stuff, it just feels like old school Pokemon in that way of, I don't know how else to describe it. It's what I really remember coming back to, and it feels good. It's hard. This game is very difficult, I think. I think the game's not afraid to kick your teeth in a lot, especially in the mid and late game. This game's like, if you're not high enough level, good luck. And I think a problem with that is I don't think effectively communicate the best way to level up. You kind of have to engage with a mechanic, the phone, to learn that you can level up faster, because everything is so under you until you get to the challenges, and then everything's above you again. And things hit hard in this game.
Well, that's you touched on one of my big problems with this game, which is that I think you face enough trainers throughout the mainline game to where you shouldn't have a problem leveling up. The problem is that the common trainers that you'll run across, and even like Team Rocket Grunts and stuff like that, their Pokemon are so drastically under-leveled compared to you. And that seems to be done intentionally because they know that there's an entire second half of the game waiting. And so this is one of the only Pokemon games I can think of where you get to the Elite Four and the first time around, and the Pokemon they're rocking are like level 40s, 50s. Usually I feel like it's 60s or so when you get to the Elite Four. It felt like you get to the Elite Four and everybody's Pokemon are about 10 levels lower than normal once you reach that stage of the game. And I feel like the game does this intentionally because, again, there's an entire second half they want you to go off and explore, and they want you to feel like you still have progression left with your team, and there's still a lot of room there. But it does make leveling up very difficult. And I think I should say that, I mean, we'll talk about team construction here in a bit. Max knows that I went through some crazy things to give myself the team that I have in this game, like importing certain ones from, I think I have people, I have certain Pokemon on my team that I brought over from Emerald because the only way I could get them was via Emerald, and then I PAL parked them over to Diamond and then brought them over to my SoulSilver. So like I did some crazy roster construction with this, which then in turn gives me the XP buffs because they came via trade. So I probably had a little bit of an easier time with leveling up my team, and I still found it to be, frankly, pretty ridiculous with how they just intentionally kind of try to ensure that you're not leveling up at too high of a rate. But then when you get to certain points, oh, yep, everybody's 5 to 10 levels higher than you. It's like, okay, I have to go grind now. But it really feels like I shouldn't be in a position where I have to grind because I've encountered literally every possible trainer in this map in this Johto region that I could. And I'm still getting my teeth kicked in, like Max said.
I agree. The Johto grind is fine. Like, I think they've planned that well. But then when you go to Kanto, why are the wild still babies?
Yes. That's exactly why I transported one of my Pokemon over, because I wanted a Houndoom in this game. The only place you can get a Houndour in the game is in Kanto, and it's like level 15. And Max is like, well, why don't you just wait until you get to Kanto and do it? I'm like, because the grind is insane in this game. It's absurd. And not only that, but why are Johto Pokemon only in Kanto parts of the map? That gets crazy.
Yeah.
Truly crazy.
It's absurd. And I think, the trainers, they kind of keep up with the way, are they like high 30s? And that's not good enough anymore. And unless you get repeated battles in the Poke Gear and the phone and all that. But I think the fact that if you want to say like, oh, you're going to encounter a brave new wilderness that is, 3 years removed from the story, like have there be some growth. And I feel like that it's a stunting in a way, I think. And that's tough.
This is, I think, part of what I was talking about having time. When you're a kid playing this game, you have all the time in the world to run around and do the menial grinding of fighting weaker Pokemon and just taking the baby drip of XP that way, or have the time to really engage with the rebattle mechanic in the game. But as an adult playing this game, and also playing the game for a show, which I understand is a situation all three of us put ourselves in, which then also adds exterior pressure of, well, I need to beat this game in a somewhat timely manner. But still, it's getting to the Elite Four even, I was a bit under-leveled, and that was really tough. But then later on, those gyms, you get to the gym leaders, and they're really hard. And what are your options? You fought every trainer near you. You could, I guess, go back to Johto and do the rebattle thing, but that requires you to get on a train or to fly to the middle of the map and then fly to Johto, because you can't fly cross-continent.
Data loading, it's hard.
And so there's that, just kind of this hurdle to even get to the grind part. There's like a pre-grind to the grind. And the XP sharing device, only that's not how it is later, at least. So that's not really
That's how it
useful.
should be. That's how it should be.
Okay.
It's a drip feed. It's come on, just help me
I'm an
out
XP
here,
share originalist over here.
But so what do you do? And then I ran into the problem Logan was talking about, not with a Houndoom. I wanted a Gengar. I was like, well, I guess I have to get this at night in Bell Tower was where the quickest I could get a Ghastly. And it's like, well, it's level 15. How am I going to bring this up? And so that was a lot of grinding just to bring it even close to my team.
And then who'd you trade with?
Yeah. Well, I did technically, because I could have the ROM on the 3DS and then the real game on my DS. So I did do some trading, not of Pokemon. Every Pokemon on the game I caught on the HeartGold. I didn't do, because I don't have legacy Pokemon like Logan lying around on an Emerald cartridge to do. But I did do some trading. Was it for items and stuff, and evolutions for the Gengar and a Machamp. So, because there's a trade in, I think, Goldenrod in the store where you could trade a Drowsy for a Machoke or...
I believe it's a female Machop.
Yes.
And I was funny you mentioned that, because I was reading today where it was, people who were like, oh my God, Whitney's Miltank is so hard. It's got to roll out, and that attract, and like it's a female Machop specifically to counter that if you really have a problem with it.
And that's how I got through that gym.
Yeah.
And that was the only one that I had technically traded because the game treats it as a trade. And that Machop, who turns into the Machamp, always got this boosted XP. Now, I will say, it took me about half the game to realize why he was gaining so much more XP.
Oh, okay. Yep.
I thought it was the item he had. And then when I got rid of it, I realized, oh, it has nothing to do with the item you're holding. So that was interesting.
1.5 times, yeah.
Yeah, which was immensely helpful. And I kind of wish everyone else leveled up like that.
Yeah, I think I imported like 3 or 4 Pokemon on my team because I knew about that. And I was like, I'm just going to make the grind a little easier for myself in this sense. So I brought over I think I brought over 3 Pokemon from Diamond. So my starter was like under-leveled compared to all of them. It's like, come on, get up there, catch up with the rest of the gang.
So this is where I'll share that my SoulSilver cartridge, my fiance is going through her first experience with the game while I was playing. And the HeartGold cartridge I have, my brother was trying a Nuzlocke with it. So a physical, while I do have the physical cartridges, was not available to me. Going the emulation route, you do have some advantages, like a toggle at a button press of a faster playback speed. It is nice to play this game at times at 600%. If you want the grind of just mash through, just bop, 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 it's real nice.
Yeah.
However, you are isolated, and creatures that do need trading to evolve kind of have to be stuck there. So it's the trade-off.
Let's talk about roster construction then, because I'm curious, how did that... Max knows my own level of insanity when it comes to roster construction. I look at the entire Pokédex beforehand, and I'm like, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. And I didn't do that as crazy this time. I guess there was like 3 or 4 that I knew I wanted on my team. I ended up with I knew I wanted a Xatu because I don't think I've ever used one before. And I was like, okay, yeah. Psychic Bird, let's try this. I had a Ursaring, I had a Houndoom, and then I wanted a Hitmontop as well this time, which is hard to get, which is why
very difficult.
Which is why I wanted it. So I had to run around in Diamond to find a Tyrogue because you can't even get a Tyrogue in again, this is like the weirdness of Silver and Gold. I don't think you can get a Tyrogue until you get one in Kanto, or you get one from one of the karate guys, but it's like a late game. And
yes,
so I was like, I don't want to do that. But even then, again, we're naturally getting into some weird things. Tyrogues in Gen 4 don't learn they learn like 3 moves up until level 20, and then they evolve. And then from level 20 onward, whatever they evolve into, it'll obviously learn different moves. For Hitmontop specifically, though, its triple kick move, it learns at like level 16. So then It's like, what? I can't even get a Hitmontop until I evolve it at level 20. And then it's one of its core moves. I had to go to the
heart scale.
Yeah, I think I had to bring it back to Diamond, and then go to the move learner there and teach him the move, and then trade him back. So these are some of the insane idiosyncrasies of Gen 4 that I don't understand. Like, who thought this stuff out? One other problem in the game, and I don't know if this was a problem for you guys again with how you built your teams. Where do you get you don't get the Fire Stones, the Electric Stones, you don't get those until Kanto. I had a Pikachu on my team that I could not evolve into a Raichu until I got to Kanto, I believe, because one of the only ways you can get it is you have to go to the guy who's in Bill's old house above Cerulean City, and he's like, I want to see this certain Pokemon. And if you bring him the Pokemon, then he'll give you a certain evolutionary stone as a reward. And I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. I can just trade my Pikachu again back to my Diamond. I'll just go. I think I just had an Electric Stone on me, and I just evolved it really fast and then swapped it back over. Like, there are if you tried to build a native team within Silver and Gold that you could not use help from other games, it's so hard. Like, I believe, like, it is so, you are met with problems left and right, and especially with a lot of the new Pokemon. Like that's what I don't get. Like they're locking these new Pokemon behind. Like Hitmontop's a really cool Pokemon, and it's a very unique one in that gen. But even if you get it, it's not going to know great moves. It's just there's so many weird little strange things I came across with this game. So I'm curious if you guys had any of similar problems like this.
I agree. A quick sidebar. The stone situation is weird. You're totally right of hiding behind weird mechanics. According to Cerebi.net, a Thunderstone in Johto come first in the bug catching contest in National Park.
But it's RNG. I think that's RNG with the stone you get.
So
yeah,
correct. And then our good pal, the Pokegear phone, there's a certain trainer that you have to talk to, and so it's attributed to Route 38, and it's the chance that they'll call you and say, I found this. I always remember it's the guy on Route 42 has the water stone, but it's like a similar sort of thing where
it's just a total crapshoot of whether or not you're going to get this stuff. So it's like, okay, well,
totally.
I like with how I plan my teams out far in advance like that. Like I knew I wanted a Raichu this time, and I had like a level 45 Pikachu, and I was like, why do I not have a Thunderstone yet? This is kind of odd. And so
I mean, early game, I was like, you get this mystery egg and Togepi hatches. You know what? This time around, I'm gonna try because now it can evolve into Togekiss in Gen 4. Didn't, of course, for the original Gold and Silver games because that wasn't a thing. But I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try. And I got it to evolve it into a Togetic. But then another flying option was presented, and it's like, oh, this is just better.
Yeah.
Like the Togetic was just not worth it to keep in the party long term. So, yeah, they present you with these interesting options, but then just have it be very stifling.
What did your team look like in lieu of not being able to get certain trait Pokemon?
Oh, sure. So it ended up being that I when I play these games, and I've played Gen 2, Gen 4, and for the Johto games many times, without fail, I'm gonna run a Geodude, I'm gonna run an Abra, and you evolve it up into Kadabra, like without fail. And of course, then this is the stopping point where like, and an Alakazam and a Golem would be real nice. So to become the Johto champion with the Elite Four, I did have a Graveler and a Kadabra on my team. But once you start pushing in the late game, like I can catch a legendary and I probably replace it. Oh, the Snorlax can learn Earthquake. Maybe we'll do that instead. So did you guys nickname your Pokemon? Because I'm not normally one to nickname my Pokemon, but for this time around, I decided to have fun with it. So my Elite Four, we didn't even talk about starter. What starter did you pick?
Oh, I went with Totodile.
Totodile.
All right, we're all Totodile boys. He's the best one.
The reason I did that, though, is because I think water types suck in Gen 2. And this is something else we can talk about in a second. I feel like the Pokemon, like the variation of Pokemon in this gen is kind of crummy. Like, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Where Gen 3 is too much water, Gen 2 is not enough.
That's right. Yeah. So my Elite Four team was Chompers, the fur alligator, Goldywool, the Ampharos, Rooster, the Ho-Oh. I caught Entei.
Oh,
so
nice.
I named him Iroh. I had Psyche, the Kadabra, and Mega Woman because it was a female grappler.
Mega.
Because I was going to go Mega Man. But then like, oh no, it's a female.
For Rock
do
Man.
Mega Woman.
Mega Woman.
Yeah.
So I did run into a similar problem to you, Logan. I didn't need a Thunderstone. I needed a Leaf Stone. To evolve my Gloom into a Vileplume. And I did wait until I got to Bill's grandfather's house because.
But Blossom.
I didn't want
Blossom.
the tiny little Blossom. What is, I don't know. I didn't even look at Blossom really.
Isn't it Sunstone?
It's a Sunstone evolution.
Okay.
Yep.
So I did a Leaf Stone and got Vileplume that way. For Alligator, hello, because I needed fire and flying, and so I thought I'd just fuse those into one. I didn't catch any of the legendary dogs or anything. They were too difficult roaming around the world. I even got one with a mean look, and it still ran away. So I don't know what I was doing wrong there. a Gengar, like I mentioned, a Champ also, and then a Mewtwo, because it was late game and I needed something strong, and it's level 70. And I was like, all right, you are a 15, 20 level jump here. We need you.
Is that what you used to trounce Red, I assume?
It was a part. I did not trounce Red. Red took 45 minutes.
Okay.
It was arduous, to say the least, but it felt good. Mewtwo was a part of it. I actually taught Mewtwo Earthquake to deal with Pikachu.
Oh, see, Mewtwo's a special attack piece, so it's like Shadow Ball and Ice Beam are probably the ones you want to do. Feraligatr, Ampharos, and Ho-Oh ran with me to the end. I subbed out the other 3 for Bigums, the Snorlax, Yu-Gi-Oh, the Lugia, and less than 3 as the Mewtwo. Yeah.
Gotcha.
I like that.
I have not swapped out my team yet. I do keep entertaining the idea of dropping the Hitmontop, though, because I think he kind of sucks. If you don't evolve twice, I don't think you're that good in Pokemon games. I always like to get Pokemon that evolve twice because you just get those natural stat bumps.
Yeah.
I will say some self-imposed struggle that I put on myself, and I'm aware how dumb this was in hindsight. One of the mechanics in Pokemon is if you don't evolve a Pokemon, they learn more powerful moves sooner than they would in their next evolution. And I was looking at my Totodile and then Croconaw. That's a tongue twister, at least for me. And I was like, you learned Hydro Pump at level 51. Hold this Everstone. And so I didn't evolve into a Feraligatr until after learning Hydro Pump. And then I immediately replaced Hydro Pump with that one move you can learn from the lady.
Yep. That's exactly why when you told me that you were going to do this, I was like, Max, there's a much better option later for you.
I didn't tell you until I had done it.
Yeah,
so
I know.
It wasn't you. You couldn't even warn me. I forget what the move is called, though, but the super strong one.
Is it Hydro Cannon?
Yeah. So I immediately replaced it
or
with
just
Hydro Cannon.
Surf. Like, Surf is perfectly fine.
Surf is
well,
good.
Yeah. It was. I made mistakes. Okay, I made some mistakes.
Yeah, Max sent me an image of his own game, and he said, "Finally, I have a Feraligatr." And I was like, "Wait, why do you still have? How has it not reached level 36?" And he's like, "Oh, it's flown past 30.
Level 30.
He's like, "Oh yeah, it's like level 55." I was like, "What are you doing in this playthrough, sir?"
I won't do that again. I won't make that mistake.
One other thing I'm curious about with you guys, and this is, again, something they changed later, which was for the better, I believe. I found that a lot of this could just be tied specifically to the Pokemon that I ran with, but did you guys feel like a lot of the moves that your Pokemon learn in these games suck? Because I was finding that most moves my team was naturally learning was terrible, and the moves that I was outfitting them with that were actually good came from TMs, which are only one-time uses in this game. And that's a change they made in the later games that was greatly beneficial. Like most of the moves that I have on my team that I think are worthwhile are moves that I taught everybody. Like I think my Ursaring, for instance, knows Earthquake, it knows Avalanche. Slash is a move it naturally learned, and then there was another TM move that I think I taught it as well in that mix. 3 of its 4 moves are TMs. Like,
yeah.
And it's not like it was learning anything else that was very good. Like this was a thing with Hitmontop as well. Like all of its good moves, it's learned earlier in its kit before it even evolved. And it's like, oh, this is so strange. Like why is this a thing? I
think this is a whiplash of, playing newer Pokemon games and then going back, because I remember the shift of going forward. I think it was Sun and Moon of like, this Pokemon learns this move this early, like, and then of course they do the TMs are, endless use and all that. But then you go back to the times and some of the movesets are real rough. I mean, raising an Ampharos and like Discharge even comes way too late.
Yeah.
And you got to rely on Thunder Punch most of the way. But then again, that's the difference of a physical attack versus the special attack. So Thunder occurs like super late, and it's like in the 60s, I think, even in its
same with my Xatu. It learns Psychic on its own eventually, but I think it's like near like 60s or 70s levels. I'm like, well, I'm just gonna go.
Insane.
I'm just gonna give it the TM here, because I think Xatu, what's crazy about that is it doesn't even learn any Psychic moves naturally,
and that's the worst
until Psychic.
The worst.
It had no psychic special attack moves whatsoever until it learned psychic, like in the level 60s or 70s. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do with this thing?
And there are too many Pokemon that's the case, where it's like it's a specific type, but you have this like baby move or no move at all to like take advantage of that. And say, well, what am I doing with it? Yeah.
I felt like my team struggled a lot, and probably part of that was self-imposed. But I struggled a lot with the HM stuff because I wanted a balanced team, and then I'm required to navigate the world to have at least 3 of these HMs by the end game with me at all times. And it's like, well, do I really want to take my Totodile, or for Alligator at that point, and have it no surf and waterfall, and then have Machamp, rock climb and smash and what strength? It's like, well, where's the variety in moves here? And so I really struggled with that. Vileplume or Gloom really didn't know anything except Poison Powder, Sleep Powder, Cut, because I needed Cut, and then the Drain moves, And so I'm stuck with these for most of the game. It wasn't till Kanto that I went to the move Forgetter. Finally, I was like, I think it's actually before Red. I was like, I don't want this move. Get rid of Cut.
Yes.
Please go away. And so I had Giga Drain, Sleep Powder, I want to say Petal thing.
Petal Dance, yeah.
Petal Dance. And then I looked up Grass TMs and found Grass Knot. I was like, this will probably help.
That's a good one. Yeah, sure.
So but that was at the very end of the game. So I'm struggling with a lot of the HM balance, I think. And the moves they learned definitely weren't my favorites at all, for the most part. But Ho-Oh, I didn't really change much. I don't think the only thing I changed was teaching it Fly, because I needed Fly to get around the world, and it needed I think a flying move. But I kept the 2 fire moves and the psychic one just for variety's sake. I guess I would trade out Extra Sensory. It's just, I felt hindered by the HM requirements of the world, and I'm very worried about Ruby and Sapphire, because isn't that part of the too much water? Isn't it a bunch of water
sort
HMs?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember how much of a role that Whirlpool and Waterfall play in that game.
Okay.
Because they add HM08 was not Rock Climb. That was a new one for Gen 4.
Well, Dive is in there too.
That's it. HM08 is Dive, and it's basically a water dig. So at least it's a nice move to use, but I mean, how much do you really need to use it? Yeah, I ended up having my Red Gyarados Lake of Rage be my a water HM slave that would have Surf and Whirlpool and Waterfall, and then there's probably one more on top of it. Maybe it could do Strength. It's ridiculous.
Whirlpool is the one that's too far in this game. Whirlpool is okay, Waterfall and Surf, at least they serve a practical use in combat. Whirlpool, we've gone too far here.
Super situational. It's the Blackthorn Gym, and it's the Whirl Islands, and that's about it.
Yeah. And then there's, what's even stranger still is Flash is needed at times in this game, and it's a TM. You can eventually, I think you can go buy, I think Flash is one of the TMs you can buy freely in the mart. So Correct. They do it that way that you won't ever be in a position where you don't have a Pokemon that has Flash somehow. So that's at least nice.
Headbutt and Rock Smash as well.
Yeah, there's weird situational TMs like that. And obviously you can continue to learn them. The one guy will teach it to any Pokemon in the forest, which is fine, I guess, but those are even Flash is the one that's a little weirder. Headbutt's a little bit more just for fun if you want to try to get certain Pokemon that way. But
if you want a Heracross,
yes, if you want a Heracross, or do you get Spinarak that way, or is that
probably and Pineco's?
Yeah.
But I think that's clearly far and away one of the best things that the newer Pokemon games have done is just it'll be a random thing in the world, or with this Scarlet and Violet, it's your legendary Pokemon buddy. You'll get around the world no problem. It won't take up your moves. But
yes,
that's a struggle with the earlier games for sure.
I did want to ask you guys, I brought this up before, what you thought about the new Pokemon that are introduced in Gen 2 in a general sense, because I think we spoke about this before the show briefly, but I mentioned that I think this new Pokédex kind of sucks. And I think it gets better over the years, because they start adding new evolutions to some of the Pokemon that were introduced in this generation. Like I think of like Sneasel eventually gets like an evolved form, and there's a bunch of like one-off introduced Pokemon in this game. Basically, I guess that's my point, is that there is a lot of Pokemon introduced in this game that don't evolve within this game, and then later that Game Freak went back and was like, well, hey, maybe we should add new forms to these Pokemon. So by current standards, I don't think they're bad, but at the time, like, they weren't great. I also think the Pokédex lacks a ton of variety. There are only a couple fire options. There are a couple water options that I can think of. There's not a good mix of things here, and it feels like there are a lot I really like in this gen. Like Houndoom is I've loved my Houndoom. Tyranitar, awesome. I did not have one this time, but Tyranitar is like one of my favorite Pokemon ever. Great Pokemon, awesome. I think the ones that are truly good in this gen are some of the best Pokemon ever, and they're some of my favorite. But I do not think the new Pokemon introduced overall are that great. And I think this is something that took until this playthrough for me to really click and realize that maybe I don't like Gen 2's Pokemon as much as I once thought I did.
I think that's fair. I wonder how much that has to do with, the 2000 Gold and Silver release, and how much more can we cram in. If you want a real fun deep dive, like look into the reports of like when someone, cracked open a beta of Gold and Silver, and you see like how Pokemon looked differently, or Pokemon that they were considering including. Like Leafeon at one point was going to be considered for the original Gold and Silver game. Like crazy stuff. But you're right. I mean, just scroll through the National Pokedex at your whim, and there's a lot of trash here. Like, who's honestly raising a Hoppip?
Yeah.
I mean, like, Skiploom and Jumpluff are nothing. Sunkern is one of the babiest of baby Pokemon, and it's not even a baby Pokemon. Like, pretty sure it's like one of the lowest stat added up all together. Like, just one of the weakest, period. And even the ones that are cool, you touched on it earlier, Logan. Like, there's just obscure, odd ways to go about getting them, and is it really worth it in the end?
You mentioned you had one of my favorite. I love Ampharos. Ampharos is one of my favorite electric types ever. It's so good. I recommended Max to get it, and I don't think he did. I love Ampharos though.
Is that the thing in the lighthouse?
Yes.
Okay.
It evolves from Mareep. So you run into Mareep just south of Violet City, and it's a tough go on the early part of its moveset. It's Thundershock for a long time. I generally teach a Floppy Headbutt, and you do okay with that for a little while. But then it's, once you hit Ampharos, like easy goings, because as you mentioned, like it's for an electric type, it's that or Pikachu. And that's it. Like I'm looking through and like there's really no other electric type that's viable.
That's why I ran with Raichu this game, because usually I always get Ampharos, and I was like, why do I always get Ampharos? And then I quickly realized like there's not another option. I guess Lantern, but then
Shinchou and Lantern, yep.
But then you have that's part water type as well, and I already had a Feraligatr. I was like, I don't want to double up in that regard, so yeah.
Are you really getting an Elekid? Are you going to catch Raikou in the wild?
Well, yeah, I guess that's a big element of the game too, which I was about to invoke, is the babies.
Oh, yeah.
Like they've got the new form. I feel like that's another strange thing that they did in this generation, is like new forms of previously existing Pokemon. Like, let's make Pikachu have a baby. Let's make Clefairy have a baby. And Igglybuff is an early form of Jigglypuff. But even goes the other way too. Like we mentioned Blossom and Slowking. And I like these Pokemon. They're fine, but it feels, for as creative and as inventive as this generation is in a lot of ways, especially from a gameplay standpoint, like with bringing Kanto in and stuff, I feel like the actual Pokemon are not that well thought out in some regards. It's just very low level ideas that they had. But the wholly new Pokemon in the decks I like, but there's just not enough of them. I feel like.
Chief among them, lack of creativity. Porygon 2.
Yes. Yes, precisely.
So for me, a lot of this blurs, right? This is kind of just that early Pokemon life. So some of these feel like they've been around forever. I know the core 151 fairly well, which is, I guess, what helps me delineate which is not in that core original set. But I think it says a lot that I think by circumstance, not necessarily desire, 4 of my 6 on my team are Gen 1 Pokemon.
Yes.
Mewtwo I sought out solely for the level and the power. Gengar's the one I desired. But the other 2 were from the first gen, for Alligator, the starter. I also think looking at the Elite Four, the first time around, if you fight the Elite Four a second time, they have some Diamond and Pearl and Ruby Sapphire in there too, but a solid chunk, I'd say at least half, if not more, of the Elite Four's Pokemon are from the first gen through each set of them. And Lance is all Gen 1 when you finally fight him all the way around. So it kind of feels like what we can see today. We were talking before the show about, there's like Galarian Meowth and Alolan Meowth. Well, back here in Gold and Silver, it was what you were talking about. Here's the pre-evolution of Pikachu or Jigglypuff. And here's new Eevee evolution, the Eeveelutions, which would go on to be a tradition forever at this point. But it just doesn't, there's not a lot of powerful standout Gen 2 Pokemon, I think, at least in the early game, for sure.
Well, I want to go back, and I mentioned before that there's not a lot of evolved forms in this Pokédex. And now that I'm looking at the Pokédex off to the side, I just want to name some off quickly that don't evolve, and it's just crazy. Apom eventually later gets an evolved form, but didn't at the time. Stantler. We've got Girafarig, which is finally getting a new evolved form in Scarlet and Violet 20 years later. We've got Smeargle. This is where it gets very strange to me, is like with the water types specifically. We've got Quillfish, which doesn't evolve. We've got Corsola, which doesn't evolve. We've got Remoraid, which doesn't evolve. We've got Octillery, which doesn't evolve. Or wait, does
Remoraid evolves?
Remoraid evolves into Octillery. That's right.
Yeah.
But like just so many one-off Pokemon: Delibird, Gligar,
Mantine,
Skarmory, Mantine. Yeah, eventually later gets one. Again, with the water types not really evolving, though. It's so... Murkrow doesn't evolve until later. Sneasel, Misdreavus. It's incredibly common throughout this generation. I feel like more so than a lot of others, that it's just chock full of Pokemon that don't evolve for one reason or another. And again, later this changes. I'm aware of that. But at the time, it's kind of odd. I don't know.
Super fair observation. Heracross, Shuckle, Wobbuffet, Yanma at the time. Like,
yes,
it's ridiculous. Dunsparce, Gligar. That is an interesting observation. Like, you can go on. And then you can also look at, when they do Ruby and Sapphire, that's where they start to fall prey to, well, we need a Caterpie replacement. So that's where you get the Wurmple. So it's a Pokédex in this game that it's like, it's trying to do new things, new ideas, not just say, well, let's do the new version of this Kanto Pokemon. I think that'd be an issue with, generations to come. But at the same time, then the ideas they came up with aren't that interesting.
And I think this kind of does tie back in with what we said before at the very top of the show, which is this game wants to be a sequel. And so I feel like that influenced a lot of ways in which they developed the Pokemon that appeared in this gen. Like, well, we don't need another worm type Pokemon. We've already got Caterpie. We'll just put Caterpie in the game. We'll just put Weedle in the game. And but the ideas that they then had in turn was, hey, what if Poliwhirl evolved into a Politoed? Or what if they just create these different one-off evolutions of Pokemon that already existed, or they introduce Pokemon that didn't evolve. Again, it's not a problem on its own, but I guess I look at what future Pokédexes did, and then I come back to this one. I'm like, this is a very bizarre lineup we've got here. And clearly they realized it was a problem too, because again, half the Pokemon or more that we've mentioned have since received evolved forms. Like even Girafarig, they went back to the well 22 years later and they're like, hey, we should add this thing should evolve somehow. What do we want to do with this now? So
it's great fodder for nostalgia. Yeah, like, in the Legends Arceus game, Quillfish has an evolution. Like, who would have thought? Is it tied to a weird, game that's set in the distant past, I guess, but it's different little points that you can pick out.
Yeah, for sure. Max, I want to come back to you with something you mentioned earlier. And Peter, I think you mentioned this as well, which is the phone. This is a core pillar of this game, and it's something that's in this game a lot. What did you want to talk about with the phone specifically, Max?
I want to first thank you both, because if you had not requested that we change our group chat image to Joey and his Rattata and then require me to get his phone number, I'm quite sure that I would have said no to most phone numbers. But you said to make sure to get his phone number, and then it just started the habit of saying yes to everybody. And lo and behold, while we're playing the game, Peter, you come out of the blue and go, guess what I learned today?
Yeah.
The grind that we have talked about, the alleviation, the release valve on that grind is rebattling trainers. They're free at certain times, or they'll call you up and say, hey, I want to fight again. I'm stronger. Let's, meet on Route 38 and we'll fight again. But it doesn't tell you outright, I should say. I mean, I guess it's implied, but it doesn't tell you outright that they are stronger, significantly stronger, and give you more XP, and you can fight them. And then that carries over to the gym leaders, which is a cool, fun thing to surprise. Like, this is how you could find out. And then you can battle the gym trainers over and over and over and over and over again. And they're at a pretty high solid level, and you get a bunch of XP that way. But the grind solution is to just live by this world's schedule, or to change your DS's internal clock.
Yes.
And that's what I did a lot of the time, especially when I was able to rebattle all of the trainers. There was a fun, collecting all of those. But I feel like I actually didn't realize until I was thumbing through the strategy guide for Gold and Silver, but the phone was a mechanic in the original versions of these games, just not as in depth as I've at least, again, I just saw it in the guide. But I feel like HeartGold and SoulSilver have an over-reliance on the phone and leveling up that way by battling people to the point to a detriment. I do think it makes this world feel alive. I thought a lot of Majora's Mask, where people have schedules, they do things. This is similar in that way, not necessarily of come here at this time and do this quest, although I think there's at least one maybe in this game that does that. But it's, I'm a gym trainer and I'm only available at this day at this time. I'm free. We can fight whenever. I like that makes the world feel lived in and alive, and these people are leveling up. It's fun seeing trainers you fought before have new evolved Pokemon of what they had before, or bigger, stronger teams. But at the cost of you leveling up super slow by battling just regular trainers or wild Pokemon, I think is a loss there.
I'm in the opposite camp, because I mentioned this to you guys, but I did not get any of the phone numbers this time other than youngster Joey, because I kept wanting to hear about his top tier Rattata tales. And until Peter messaged us, which you kind of mentioned, Max, Peter messaged us in our Discord group while we were playing this game, and he's like, hey, you guys should get the phone numbers because you can go back and this is how a great way to get XP. I was like, oh, I have been declining all the phone numbers because I don't like hearing the bring, 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 because it's constant.
A bother.
It's so annoying. And so I guess that's, like you said, Max, it is very core to the game and core to leveling up, but it's so obnoxious. And so I've played this game before and I know how annoying it is. And so I intentionally told everybody no. And then when I get later into the game, I'm like, why don't I have a Thunderstone yet? Let me look up how to get this. Accept so-and-so's phone number and maybe they'll call you. I'm like, oh, great. So I got about halfway through the game and I realized that was a very poor choice. But again, as somebody who's played the game before, I know it's an obnoxious system. So I just did not want it to be in front of my face this entire playthrough. But that was a bad call, apparently. No pun intended.
And that's fair. And, my shock with it, why I had to tell you both, was because now playing this game as an adult where time is at a premium, what is the way to get past the stupid, why is Kanto so underleveled, but yet the challenges still rise with levels? How can you ameliorate this? Well, you look up online, did you know you can get gym leader phone numbers and rematch them whenever you want endlessly? Okay, news to me. So I guess this is going to be helpful. But even then, I'm glad the internet exists, because I would not have known to go to Daisy Oak's house in Pallet Town, and every day from 3 to 4 p.m., you can massage one of your Pokemon. And if you do it enough times, maybe 5 or so times, that will give you permission for her to give you Blue's phone number. Some of the ways to get some of these trainers' phone numbers, and at the weird, quirky times, like, yeah, it is nice and it feels lived in and on a schedule, but I'm glad the internet exists as a resource that is easily verifiable for some of these things.
I don't understand how people would figure this stuff out unless it was data mined. And apparently they did back then, but it's so strange. Like we're recording this. I mean, this will date the show a bit, but we're recording this right before Scarlet and Violet comes out, and the ROM for that game has leaked. And I don't know if you're aware of it. Either of you are aware of this, but one of my friends who's kind of been keeping up with it has said that everybody has found a Pokemon in the game, but they don't know how it evolves, but they know it does evolve. And so the community is currently putting their heads together, trying to figure out, how does this evolve? What do we do?
I've heard about this, and I don't know if this is the one, but I've heard of the way it may be, and again, could be dated, because I came across like some random comment somewhere. It's a dolphin Pokemon.
Okay.
And apparently, the way that it may be, is how it's known about, a week or so before the game launches. Because you have multiplayer in this game, you maybe evolve or have it level up past level 38 in the presence of its already evolved form. With, so one of the other players has it.
That's crazy.
So that it knows that this is a possibility. Sounds super weird, but yeah, it's gonna take weird data mining.
Do you remember those achievements in multiplayer games from back in the day where it's you get this achievement from playing against somebody who has this achievement? It's what?
That kind of thing. It's that kind of thing for sure. And is it their way of trying to recapture the playground magic, but maybe in a more digital age? It's possible. Weird stuff like that. Also, Legends Arceus had a weird evolution too, where it's you had to basically solve a puzzle that was only found in a book in the library in Canaclave in Brilliant Diamond Shining a Pearl. Gave you the solution there so that you take it to the Legends Arceus game, and that's the only way that you can evolve this Pokemon. So really weird stuff there. But point being, overall, for me to have learned about this system finally years later as an adult, because I just didn't want to spend the time, and then still spend way too much time battle after battle after battle, just grinding it up, it makes it frustrating that this is such a core part of getting to red-like levels, and just when you don't have all the time in the world for it, honestly.
It feels like Animal Crossing cheating in a way. It's just suddenly it's Sunday at 4 a.m. because this is the only time I can battle this one trainer, but really it's Tuesday afternoon, and you're just grinding over and over for the gym leaders. Some of the trainers, though, do have multiple teams over time. It's not just the one team over and over. And so I do kind of back into that world building and that playground energy. It's do you know if you do this or do that? But it's cool that the world feels alive and that people have kind of a vendetta, or they want to get back at you. They want to prove they're better than you. I wrote down in my notes, it's an early concept of the Nemesis system from those Shadow of Mordor games and stuff. It's fighting the same people over and over. And that feels cool. It's one of the payoffs in the game that I was talking about at the top of the show that just feels rewarding to come back to over and over. I just wish... And maybe it's because we were on a time crunch to a certain degree, but I just wish there was a better way to level up and enjoy this world that they've built.
I don't know if it's as much that we're on a time crunch, but I think any game that's 60 to 100 hours nowadays, I just cannot. This would have been the same. We could have not done a podcast about this in any game that is this lengthy nowadays. I'm oh boy, wow. My sweet spot for games nowadays is 5 to 6 hours. I'm yes, cool, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm about to play Modern Warfare 2, and people have been it's too short. And I'm that sounds wonderful to me. Very good, let's go. Dive into it.
What a blessed life they must lead.
I wrote down my times. Johto took me 31 and a half hours to beat the Elite, to get through and to beat the Elite Four, and to beat Red, it took doubled that time at 59 hours, essentially. So it was a 60-hour game roughly for me. all in all. It's long.
This is probably the longest one we'll play for our entire season, I imagine.
I'm okay.
And that
with
was one thing I kept having to tell you because I knew you were having some difficulty as we were playing this one. You're like, oh, when's it stop? I'm like, if we just get through this one, Max, you're good. Like the rest won't be this long. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
The one other big pillar of this game that I feel like we need to talk about is the music. And I'm curious to see how much Max has to say about this because I messaged you at one point when you were playing it. I was like, oh my gosh, this track is so good. And this track is so good. And listen to this. Oh man, the music is so good. And Max is just like, yep, it sounds like Pokemon music. So I wonder, I imagine for Peter and I, it's very hard to disconnect our nostalgia from these games with their soundtracks. That being said, I do think these might be the best games in the entire series when it comes to soundtrack. Like this and the OG games, Red and Blue, Yellow. Like I know it's very common to say that the originals are some of the best. All Pokemon soundtracks are good in their own ways, but I really do feel like this might be the peak. There's some very, very good tracks in this game all the way through up until Fighting Red at the end, which is an excellent track. I don't know how you feel about it within the context of the larger series, Peter, but I really do feel like this might be one of the high points.
I agree with you on the whole. It's interesting, once the 3DS games come along with X and Y and you have music streaming technology that you can really expand the instruments that are available, like that kind of opens up a bit more. And then it feels like for the last couple games, like they feel almost a little beholden to kind of go with these, the simpler melodies. You can't do too much. Certain tracks aside, I think in, Sword and Shield, it was really neat to kind of do the crowd chant singing stuff going along, Marnie's battle with, Team Yell, some fun stuff that they can do there. And that's nice with the improved music technology. But I think this is more than any other remake, I think, taking a reverence for like the simple chiptune music and like what can we do with the expanded DS instruments that are available to us. I think you're right, the champion battle theme, because it's the same theme like you're battling, Lance and Red. It's the same theme that's used, but it's a great track from the original Gold and Silver, but it's taken to the next level in the dramatic, epic feel with the HeartGold SoulSilver version. The fact that in HeartGold SoulSilver, they have special themes for the Lugia fight and the Ho-Oh fight, and they're incredible. Like, I think Go Ichinose composed both of them, and like, at least for the Lugia one, he's like, yeah, this is like the one I'm most proud of. Like, so much went into this track that like, it's ridiculous. Even things like National Park, where it's a soothing piece in its 8-bit chiptune, but then it gets converted in this just lovely piano that just hits you out of nowhere and you're struck by the beauty. I think it improves things like Ecruteak Town. You really get the sense of the old Japanese town feel with the instruments that they can bring in HeartGold SoulSilver. It's a smaller Pokemon soundtrack than I think a lot of these more recent games are. There's just a lot of tracks in these new games. They have the space for it. They can accommodate that. But I think this game does it best with the nostalgia and the reverence for these simple tracks from Gold and Silver at the end of the day.
Yeah.
They may be doing some neat things with the melody and all that, but you take the cave theme of like the dark cave and ice path. It's a neat theme for, its simplistic time, but then the way it gets elevated for the different types of instruments and the reverb effects that get played, it's really amplifying these tracks to their ultimate level that they could at the time.
You mentioned Ice Path, which is one of my favorites. I think that's got such a distinct vibe. I also have always been really prone to loving Azalea Town's theme for some reason. It's one of my favorites in the game. It is a very simplistic soundtrack, but I just think the melody work, like you said, is very it's some of them. There are more earworms in this soundtrack than a lot of the other Pokemon games.
I mean the Team Rocket theme,
yes,
especially when you're taking over the town, like it really gets you. The game corner is ridiculous, and that's a shame because I think in Gen 4, like there were betting regulations that like had to change up what the game corner was, so it's not as important, but it's still also the Lucky Channel theme. But like there's it's a lot of great stuff, and even the battle tracks. Partial to the gym leader theme in this game. The rival theme is one of the best rival battles. There's just a lot of great stuff here on the soundtrack for sure.
Max, do you have anything else to say other than Pokemon music?
Peter named the 2 specific songs that I had down. I'm gonna Ekritique. I said as a bop. Windy old Japanese town strings were the words I wrote. I guess that makes a sentence. And then National Park. Piano is my kind of calm tune. I found it interesting. Someone I know all 3 of us are familiar with, Insane in the Rain. He has a ton of Pokemon covers, and I'm definitely going to bring him up in our Diamond and Pearl episode for sure. But when I looked up his Gold, Silver, Crystal tracks, National Park was one of his few ones from this gen, and I think that's a testament to this particular song in general. And then I also just wrote down epic battle themes. I mean, some of these songs go hard, and it just matches the energy of the moment as well. The championship battle in Red in particular, the drama is there, and it adds and makes it feel like a really important battle, which it is. So that's really what I wrote down for this music. It's good.
One other track I want to shout out, and it's a track that has no reason being as catchy as it is because it's such a minor character. But Yusin's theme, when he's this random dude that shows up and he's all about finding Suicune, but why does he have this like big dramatic flair of a theme? And he shows up and then he comes out of nowhere, but yeah, you put a lot of love in this random theme. All right, go off.
Yeah, Yusin's continued appearance throughout the game is... I like that they continue to incorporate that stuff because he's from Crystal, correct?
Crystal,
okay,
yes. Yep.
Yeah, I had never played Crystal as a kid. That was always the one. My friends were like, "Oh, play Crystal." I'm like, "I don't know, I already got Silver. I'm good." Yusin's music is great too, and his involvement in the game as a whole is a little awkward at times and just kind of out of nowhere. But yeah, he's got a great theme there. All right, well, let's wrap up this episode in the way that we always do with each episode here on Chapter Select, which is talk about this game's legacy, which I think there's a lot behind this one. I think for me, kind of bring it full circle with what we said at the top and kind of how Peter kicked off the conversation. Pokemon is now 25 years old. It's 26 years old, I guess, this year. And I still feel like this game... either Gold and Silver or HeartGold and SoulSilver, whatever. Regardless, I feel like this is still the one everybody points to as like, oh yeah, that's the best one. Like that's like to this day, if somebody asked me what the best one is, I'd probably knee-jerk reaction would say this one. We'll see if that remains true once we finish playing through all of the games this season. But even Max knew that coming into this is the one that everybody says is the best. This is the one that everybody always highlights. And I think that is this game's legacy in a lot of ways. It is the Pokemon game. If you were ever going to get somebody to play one single Pokemon game from any point in the series, is it the most accessible one nowadays? Like we've talked about, not really. There's a lot of other games that I think could better show people what Pokemon is nowadays. But if you want to see what Pokemon once was and kind of the high point of the first 4 to 5 gens, I would say it is this. That's the most simple way of putting it. Like, this is just the best Pokemon game from the early days of what Pokemon was and how it became a worldwide phenomenon.
For sure. And you're right. It's a game that I think people reflect on, and it's defined by the 2 moments. It's the Kanto reveal and it's the Red fight. Mm-hmm. And in a way, it's unfortunate that it's so dependent on you having the previous experience with that original game.
Yeah.
Or else it's like, oh, okay, more stuff to do. Okay, this random tough trainer at the otherwise it just doesn't mean as much, right? But I think you're right, as we kind of all discovered, especially Logan, as we have that deep nostalgia. It's one thing to say that this game is more than 10 years old to begin with, and Pokemon has made great strides in quality of life since then. But then the fact that they're going off of the framework of a game that is more than 20 years old and trying to stay true to that and not mess it up too much. It really is telling in certain regards there. I think, looking at the Pokédex for Johto, a great gold mine for generations to come, but at the time, you're right, it's trapped in, well, it's a sequel, but we don't have the refresh of generations to come where, Pachirisu is just like all the Pikachu clones, all the birds, all the bugs. We're going to see with Scarlet and Violet, and people who are listening to this when this launches can look back like, yeah, well, Scarlet and Violet sure had all these kind of little early. I mean, Lechonk, and Lechonk is the Bidoof. Who is the
Fido is new Growlithe, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just interesting to see, but this game does have a legacy to it. It's the best of what Pokemon was, and I think that is a good way to put it.
I had 3 points, I guess, for legacy, and as someone who's coming to this game now, I guess I talked about it, over 10 years ago, but I didn't play it, and so. The first one I wanted to mention, Peter's actually name dropped him a few times in the episode, but Satoru Iwata, he made this game what it is, with the Kanto reveal, with the red fight. It was because of his work, and I'm gonna have a link in the show notes for it, but there is an Iwata Ask interview about HeartGold and SoulSilver that I read before the show and pulled some quotes and stuff, but I highly recommend you read it if you haven't, because what he did and what they were able to make for Gold and Silver is incredible. I mean, he figured stuff out by printing out Game Boy source code and looking at it for a few days. Like, he's looking at raw source code, and they figured out how to fit it all in. It's incredible, and I think that's a huge part of it. It's not just this game and Pokemon's legacy, but Iwata's as well, who's incredibly important to the industry. And then for myself, playing it today, while it was hard and there were struggles to overcome, it took me back to not necessarily playing Pokemon as a kid, although I think it does apply to Diamond and Pearl, but I was printing out web pages with the gym leader schedules and writing on them. I was making notes. I had modern conveniences. I had like a whole tab group of Cerebi links and pages and how to build my team and what moves on my iPad. I'm using this as if I would have a notebook. And I think there's a magic to that even as someone who didn't play this as a kid, I can be sucked back into those habits of my youth, of taking notes and digging in and really trying to figure out this game. And there were times where I was like, I'm not going to beat Red before we do the show. Like, I just can't do it. It's too hard. And when I sat down and did it, and I didn't think I was going to win when I went in that fight. I'm in the like mid upper 60s and he's in the 80s, but I pulled it off. It felt incredible. And it's awesome. And I really think this is an RPG for the ages. It's hard and it's grindy, but the world feels real. And I think if we could go back to its prime where everyone had a DS, the Pokewalkers, the online connectivity was still there, this world, the real world in the game would have extended to the real world outside with all your friends. And I think that's something special. It's an awesome game, even though it's tough as nails.
For sure. And I do remember, and I can speak to this a little bit, but yeah, this game in its heyday, when this was the Pokemon game everybody was playing and there was online aspects, very good. It is that much better than it's been with our own playthroughs here in 2022. So yeah, I think this game, if I have kids, I want them to play this game, I guess is what I'll say in the future. So you gotta get Eloise playing some Pokemon Soul Silver or Heart Gold in the future, Max.
That's the plan. If she wants to play video games, that's definitely the
You've
plan.
got the rose gold DS. Maybe she'll be into that.
I might have to buy her own because Abby kept her DS in immaculate condition. It's like brand new. I don't know if I want a kid touching it. And I think that does it for HeartGold and SoulSilver. Thank you so much for listening. You can follow the show on Twitter at Chapter Select. You can follow Logan on Twitter at Moreman12 and his writing over at comicbook.com. You can follow myself on Twitter at MaxRoberts143 and my writing over at maxfrequency.net. And you can follow Peter on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy and his work over on Original Sound Chat. Great podcast. I don't think you guys have done HeartGold or SoulSilver yet, but you've done other Pokemon episodes that I've definitely listened to.
We'll date this, but tomorrow, as of when we are recording this, Pokemon Week is upon us. So
yes.
we'll be there. So you can go back and find an episode that will include not only Pokemon HeartGold and SoulSilver, but also Pokemon X and Y.
Oh, that link will be in the show notes. You definitely should check it out. And there are other Pokemon episodes, and really, there are other episodes. So you can check out Original Sound Chat wherever you listen to your podcast. And then thank you to our members who support us directly. You can find out more by going to chapterselect.com/join. And until next time, adios. Chapter Select is a Max Frequency production. Chapter Select is supported by you. You can gain access to longer episodes and bonus content by going to chapterselect.com/join. This episode was researched, produced, and edited by me, Max Roberts. Season 6 is hosted by Logan Moore and myself. Season 6 is all about Pokemon. For more on the season, go to chapterselect.com/season 6. You can follow the show at Chapter Select and check out previous seasons at chapterselect.com.